Hi, I'm Stan Fishkind from Baltimore, Maryland, the United States. Yours truly been spending the past month here in Eretz Israel. This is about the 1st of February 2012. So we've been here for about a month, but before that, let me just do a fast rewind to about the 1970s. I have a friend in Baltimore who has an uncle who came to Eretz Israel dressed as an Arab woman, and he fought in the war of independence, and Baruch Hashem, it turned out very well for him. He did very well, and he acquired a gasoline station, a hotel, and some other real estate holdings. And in honoring his parents, he would come back to America to visit his parents. And one day, in around 1971, I imagine, I went with my boyfriend to visit him when he came, and he asked the classic question: what is a nice Jewish boy like you doing here in the United States? Why don't you come to Israel? Question mark. Great question. I was not prepared for this. And I said, well, we would love to come. We originally planned to get a trip into Israel, but one day my wife woke up in the middle of the night and said, we just can't come just for a visit, and we should come here to live and see how it is. Unfortunately, those plans were on hold for a while. And when I talked to my friend's uncle, I said this, he said, do you have a resume? And I said, sure. He said, give me your resume, and I'll see what I can do. So I gave him my resume, and a couple weeks later, I got 3 job interviews in New York City. And I went to New York City. I got on the Amtrak train, drove to New York City, and I had 3 interviews. One was with the Ministry of Defense, Minister Bitachon, Raphael. Second was another aircraft company, and I forget the third organization. Anyway, it was pretty clear that working with the Ministry of Bitachon, the Ministry of Defense, was the real choice assignment. So we had, at that time, a 3rd child on the way in about another month and a half, and my wife and I decided we will go to Israel. We'll sign their 3-year contract, and we came to Israel around the 1st of February in the 1971 time frame, something like that, with 3 under 3.
Wow.
And we landed up in a place called Kiryat Amal, which is right across the road from Kiryat Tivon, which is just about 10 kilometers, I guess, outside of Haifa, on the way to Natzeret and Tiberia. And after a couple of months of Ulpan and coming in and going into the office once in a while, I finally started to work at the Ministry of Defense. Not doing really great stuff. We were, I'll call it reverse engineering American computers. They would take a DEC PDP-10, I think, and we were taking it apart and seeing how it worked and making a ruggedized Israeli version of it. So that was really interesting. One day, we had no real insight to what was going on in terms of the military, and Yom Kippur came, and I was in shul davening, and the sirens went off, and a lot of the guys left the yeshiva, and the war started. So I was an American working for the Ministry of Defense, and I reported to work the next day. And on the first day of the war, I was making artillery shells. I was in the machine shop making artillery shells. The second day of the war, I was making radar decoys. These are things that you would put out on the field of battle, and if they were scanned, it looked like a big target. But then the third day of the war, was the most exciting thing for me professionally. The SAM-6 missile system looked like an X. In the very center of the X, you had a command center. This is where all the main radar systems were placed. And at the four corners of the X were launchers, and on each launcher you had 3, 6, 9 missiles. And these missiles were really deadly missiles. The Americans had never seen them in the clear. They were operational in Vietnam, and there wasn't enough intelligence on it. And the way it worked was the central unit did all the radar acquisition, and when they saw a target that was coming in, the command would be sent by microwave link from that center X, center X, to the launcher that was ready to take it down, and the missiles were launched. These missiles were really, really impressive. They moved fast. I think they went twice the speed of sound. The pilots did not have a warning, any electronic warning system. They hear a warble in their headsets when the missile was coming in, and all they would see would be a puff of smoke coming up, and there was virtually nothing you can do. If it was the missile was launched behind the airplane, there's no way to recover. So unfortunately, we lost tens of airplanes the first day. A couple of the missiles fell to Earth, and during that first day we were able to retrieve some of the missiles, but they were really broken up. We got lucky on the second day because we got a missile launcher that had been hit and caught on fire, but it wasn't destroyed. And this was a great blessing, because the way the system was built was all of the logic, the logic of the system was in the wiring harness of the missile launcher. So what the Russians did, they took phenolic sandwiches. They took a piece of phenolic over here, a piece of phenolic over here, and they put in between half a dozen resistors, capacitors, transistors, and depending upon how the socket was wired up, this general purpose part populated the entire thing, and the logic for the missile launcher was in the wiring. And we had about 95% of the system was just charred, but we had a couple of components that we were able to find, and in the span of about 5 or 6 days we were able to unlock the secrets of the SAM-6 missile system. And married to that was the RF, the radio frequency intelligence that we're picking up from the men on the front and from the American satellites and all kinds of other channels, between the radio frequency intelligence on what kind of communications going back and forth between the ground and the satellite, the ground and the missile. We were able to defeat the missiles. And this technology was unbelievable. The war moved fast, but this is one of the contributing factors that made the war even shorter. And the Americans were very, very, how would you say it? They had an urgent need to get this information too, because these missiles were being used in Vietnam. And so our small team, we were able to pull it together, and our small team was able to save Israeli lives and American lives and shorten both wars. So Baruch Hashem, it worked out great. It worked out great. And
can I just ask you on this?
Sure.
What about the American CIA or the intelligence? Didn't know that Russia developed the system.
Yeah, but what the Russians would do, I'll take this cup of tea as an example. You had in this command post electronic systems, and when it came time for them to test it, they would put like an igloo around it, and so there would be virtually nothing radiated out, and all the radio frequency communications that was going on, the broadcasting was inside this little igloo. So the Russians were able to test it and verify that it worked, but no one really had the information. Just a couple little points. If you were building a Russian missile system and you had a chance to mark the components, what would you put on the components? Resistor number 7, 500 ohms. Resistor number 8, capacitor da-da-da. So you have two markings, Russian, of course, and English.
Wow.
So, when I open it up and I'm looking at these things and I'm looking at the parts, and there's Russian, I can't read Russian, but I know English, and they use the international color codes for color coding. If you're looking at a resistor, it has a band of painted colors, and you can read them, so they used international colors. But the other big thing with the Russians, the components they used were 20 and 30% tolerance components. For example, if you had a resistor that was 100 ohms, that's what its nominal value to be, it could be anywhere between 130 ohms and 70 ohms. So again, it's plus or minus 30%. American components, on the other hand, were typically 0.5% tolerance. So if it was supposed to be at 100 ohms, it was either 100.5 or 99.5, something like that. So here the Russians had very, very, very broadly general purpose. I mean, it was worse than general purpose. I mean, it was really junky stuff. But what they would do is at the very end of the logic train, they had variable components, variable resistors, and inductors, and capacitors, and they would bring the whole system into perfect sync at the very end and not worry about it in the middle. So the Russian systems were very, very solid. I mean, I'm having a hard time finding the right word for it, but you take a system that was made out of general purpose parts, and by the way, the technique was they would bring buckets, barrels of general purpose parts, and they would, if something would be in a problem area, they would just pop out all these general purpose parts and throw them away, plug in the new units, and then tune it up and in business. As opposed to having high precision, high reliability, unique integrated circuits, you don't need it. You don't need it. And if you were building the front end of a missile, when a missile takes off, one of the biggest things you have to do is to worry about how cold it gets on the front end of the missile. In American missiles, they're transistorized or use the integrated circuits. The Russians used vacuum tubes, flat pack vacuum tubes. Very, very rugged, simple electronic stuff. And why a vacuum tube? Because the vacuum tube has a heater in it. When you turn on a vacuum tube, there's the filament, which is electrical, and it heats up things. And once you heat it up, it's kind of impervious to cold. But if you have an integrated circuit, one of the biggest problems with integrated circuit is that the failure rate goes up with cold. So the business end of the Russian missile was made out of vacuum tubes and heat resistant, and the lifetime of the missile was 3 minutes.
Wow.
So you didn't need something that was going to last a long time. So there I had, that was a very valuable lesson in how to build and use technology. use something that's, I won't call it kludgy, but reliable and general purpose. It also didn't hurt that we found the instruction manuals.
Wow.
Now, the instruction manuals were written in Russian and in English. So, Baruch Hashem, it worked out well. So that was the highlights of the reverse engineering that I was working with and my team was working on. The more interesting thing was what happened to the general population during the war. All of a sudden, people became more considerate on the road and in their dealings with one another. People were more concerned about the health and well-being of their friends and neighbors and strangers. So it was a real major mindset change for the better. Unfortunately, this lasted for 6, 9 months, 12 months, a year and a half, something like that, and it had a very profound effect on the psyche of the Israelis. Unfortunately, yours truly and family, we didn't have enough money with us, or could raise enough money to buy an apartment in Israel, and we returned to the United States. So that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2. After I came back to the United States, I started working for a company called Operations Research Inc. And that was a consulting company where we just did operations research, the soft side of things. For example, if you have an airport, what's the optimum number of checkout lines? What's the optimum number of luggage carts you should have? What's the optimum number and placement of the piers that you have? All of these things on optimization. So that was the mantra of the company, and it dealt with all the soft sciences, sociology and psychology and physiology and modeling and simulation. So it was a lot of R&D. And as time went on, my boss decided that he would rather work for an agency called NASA, and he left the private company and he went to work for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. And this is at the very beginning of a fantastic program called the International Space Station. So he hired me out, and I was his, quote, special assistant to the administrator. And through an interesting series of events, I later took over that division, and I was in charge of the development of the information systems for the International Space Station.
Wow.
So the International Space Station is a conglomeration of American systems, European systems, Italian systems, just a large number of families, the Russian systems. So there it was a whole mishmash of protocols, of ways of doing business, and that was exciting because if you're in just one environment, if you're just in an American environment, you have one way of thinking about it. But now when you have a family of nations all working together towards a goal, that was really interesting. So over the next number of years, the space station went through all kinds of iterations. I was involved in the end-to-end architecture of the space station. Just a point of clarification, when I tell you that I worked at NASA headquarters, headquarters does in order to do something, you do three things. Try 5 fingers out. Why, what, and how. Why, what, and how. The why are you doing this? This is working with the President and the Congress and other internationals on why are you doing it? What's the benefits? What are the high-level requirements? How do you do it? What the why and the what are very closely related. Then you get to the point where you're now ready to do the execution, the how. That's where the work was segmented and given out in work packages to all the NASA centers around the country. So yours truly was involved with the international and national aspects of the International Space Station. And then the organization was, as they say in America, it was a shotgun marriage between the space station and the space shuttle. Now, the space shuttle program started out as a research and development activity. Research and development means it's not operational. Unfortunately, there are people who have a lot of male hormones in their system, and they wanted to make it operational. I know if I were on the ladder in my house screwing in a light bulb, and my wife were watching me screwing in a light bulb, and she would say to me, "Stanley, wait a minute, don't do that. What you're doing is dangerous." As a male, I would say, "Oh, I'm okay, I'm okay." And you get up there on the ladder and you stretch, and you get up on the top rung of the ladder. You're doing something silly and stupid. And my wife would say, or any wife would say, "If you don't get down off that ladder, I'm going to divorce you." just to make sure that gets the point across. And then clunk, you get over the head that you have to listen to the voice of reason. So the shuttle program was a research and development program, but there were people in the program, and also, NASA also sold it as an operational program that treated it as if it were a real operational system, which means that you lose sight of what you're doing. When you do research and development, you really don't know what it's going to be when you finish the work, and you have a pretty good idea. The first shuttle that was developed was dropped from an airplane just to see if it would glide properly to Earth, and that wound up in the museum. And then you had 5 other shuttles that were manufactured and developed. They're very, very complex machines. How complex is it, Stanley? I'll tell you how complex it's going to be. 2.5 million parts. Wow. I'll say it again. 2.5 million parts. Now, it's been said that the space shuttle was the most complicated machine ever built. And it was. I mean, you had to have millions of parts all operating properly at the same time.
That's amazing.
To an acceptable level. And not only that, because you had so many critical systems, you had triple redundancy in things. What do I mean by triple redundancy? Suppose you have a sensor, and this sensor is supposed to be monitoring the rate of flow of hydrogen to the engines. So you would have 3 sets of sensors, 3 wire bundles, 3 different computer systems, and they would be all making the same measurement. Why? Because if all 3 of them say that's 100 pounds per square inch, oh, good, you're in good shape. But what happens if one of those systems monitors says 100, 0, then you can say, well, 2 out of the 3 say 100, and okay, it's okay. If you have 2 fail, and you haven't pushed the launch button, then you like you said, you would abort and go back. There's a phrase that we use in space: launches are optional, landings are mandatory.
Oh, that's good.
Launches are optional and landings are mandatory. That means that you really have to be sure that everything is 100% A-OK before you push the button to go. And then once you push the button to go, you have maybe 90 seconds to return to base. In other words, after the shuttle takes off from Cape Canaveral, There is a maneuver that you can do to bring it back and have it land at Cape Canaveral. It was never tested, never done, but the technique existed. But by the time the shuttle takes off, you have millions of pounds, tens of millions of pounds, I forget the number, but you have millions of pounds of weight, and to bring it up, by the time it clears the launch tower, it's going 100 miles per hour, and then after about 8 minutes, you're up about 250 miles, going around the world about 17,500 miles per hour. It is one mean machine, and it's very, 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 very dangerous. So how dangerous is it, Stanley? I don't know, but I'll give you a number. I told you it had 2.5 million parts. Out of that 2.5 million parts, we believe there are about at least 3,000 criticality one items. What's a criticality one item? That means if you lose a windshield, mission over, bad day, loss of life. You lose a wing, end the mission, loss of life, bad day. You lose a wheel, a tire, if you're coming back, end the mission, loss of life. There are about 3,000 of them, 3,000 of these critical components. Now watch my fingers. Suppose you make something that's 99.99995% good. 99.9995% good. Would you risk your life on that component? Yeah, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
You can't we spent millions and billions of dollars making all these parts as best we could, and you can never make something that's 100% good. The best you can do it is make it 99.9995% good. Statistically, you take that number, 99.995 to the 3,000 power, and you do the arithmetic, it comes out to be 0.87, 0.87, which means that you have an 87% chance of success. Wonderful. Got a problem. 87% chance, that means that you have a 13% chance of catastrophic loss of life mission on any one launch. Would you put your life at stake for 13%? Most of the people I know would never get close to. If I were to tell you you have a 13% chance of dying in your car when you go between here and your office, would you do that? No, you wouldn't do that. But there are lots of astronauts, test pilots, mission specialists who would take that risk. Now, out of 135 shuttle launches, unfortunately we've lost 2. 2 out of 135 gives you, I think, numbers 98.5% success, 1.5% loss. 1.5%. What's the big deal? Problem is that numbers doesn't really make any sense because we've lost about 14 people on the shuttle. 14 people, 1.5% loss. It's in the world of submarines. If you had that kind of a loss, that submarine would be called a widowmaker. Widowmaker.
This is on the launch, the actual launch.
Yeah, yes. Oh, launch and return.
And return.
Right now, the Challenger failed because of O-rings on the motors, and those were unknown unknowns. Those were things we just simply didn't know about. They weren't even on the list. On the Space Shuttle Columbia, the one that took Lan Ramon and other astronauts to space, the failure was foam hitting the wing of the shuttle as it took off. In the first 80 seconds of flight, Shuttle's taking off, going faster and faster, faster. In the external tank of the shuttle, we have two liquids, liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen, and those are about minus 350 and minus 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are very cold, very, very cold. And you put them into the atmosphere of Florida, and if you don't have an insulated external tank, they'll have tremendous ice buildup. If you ever saw the early pictures of Apollo taking off, well, on takeoff, you see these great sheets of ice coming off of the rocket, and you don't want to be around when those huge sheets of ice come off of a rocket. Those are lethal. Those are dangerous. A block of ice can kill you, and it can also do tremendous havoc on your vehicle. So the way we designed the external tank was to insulate it with foam, and just before launch, anywhere between say 6-8 hours before, all the way until just maybe an hour before launch, we have ice teams go out and do a visual inspection to make sure those parts that have the liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen are not forming ice, or if they are forming ice, we have laser guns and heaters, and these guys go out and chip away the ice and make sure there's no ice on there, because a piece of ice can penetrate just about anything. Anyway, 60 seconds going by, everything's going fine. 80 seconds going by on the shuttle launch for Columbia, and a big chunk of foam comes off the external tank and hits the wing of the shuttle. We never saw large pieces of foam come off. We always saw, they call them popcorn type of clouds of foam coming off. It's no big deal. We've simulated, we've tested, and we've never seen any damage. Now you might have a loose tile or a tile that's on a thermal tile on the shuttle, and they can fall off. But the way the system is designed is that you can have a bunch of tiles fall off, and you'd be worried about it, but you wouldn't abort the mission. And so the guys took off. Everything looked okay. We did see this chunk of foam come off. We did have concern. We called in the Air Force and ground cameras to look at the shuttle as it was going around the Earth, 17,500 miles per hour, 250 miles above the Earth. And none of the imagery that we got said there was a problem. And we have cameras on board the shuttle. They weren't able to go out and look at the front edge of the wing. They were able to look above the wings, below the wings, the body, and stuff like that, but nothing to see what was going on with the shuttle. Day 2 of the shuttle. By the way, that shuttle was called Columbia. Columbia was the very first space shuttle to take off, and it was heavily instrumented. And when you have the very first one heavily instrumented, that means you're measuring all kinds of things. You don't know what's going to come up. And on day 2, there was a strange event that took place. The shuttle's flying along, and all of a sudden, there was a little tip. The wings just momentarily tipped just a little bit. And what happened was, something left the shuttle on day 2, and because it left the shuttle, it floated away, and there was a very minute change in acceleration and levelness of the shuttle. And we knew about it, and we were concerned. We were able to track this particle on radar, and we couldn't tell if it was metallic or not metallic, but we could track it. It did have a signature, and it stayed as the shuttle went around. It did stay with the shuttle, eventually decayed down to Earth with the shuttle, but we just didn't know. and like I said, we called in the Air Force that had observation satellites out there. We called in ground-based telescopes, but they couldn't see anything. We couldn't find it out. So even if we had an inkling that something was wrong, there's no way back. In the shuttle, there are two possible. There are lots of ways. Lots of orbits. One orbit is just a nice circular orbit. It's optimized for taking off from Florida and going across the Atlantic and crossing over Spain, Africa, the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean. So that's the kind of an orbit that we had for that kind of a shuttle. If it was going to the International Space Station, that has a different orbit, but the Columbia was not on the same orbit as the space station. So it was a one-way trip. I was enthused. People were enthused. People were excited to have Ilan Ramon go into space. My contact, I'll talk a little bit more about that the last half dozen minutes before landing. But my contact, there are about 450 people have been to space, all told, I think, just on the shuttle alone. And the policy for NASA is you try to get as many different people up there to experience space as possible. The ideal is a teacher, the ideal is a scientist, the ideal is a communicator. All these people are... we had a little bit of a commercial interruption here. Okay, now I think we're back in operation here. Thank you very much for the question. So the idea is we get as many different people up there as possible. We have people from all over the world who are qualified to be mission specialists. A lot of the people from medicine, biology, meteorology, all kinds of scientists go up on the space shuttle. And you have an opportunity for people to really, really experience space. I don't know all of them, but I do work with lots of astronauts because these are the guys who drive the ship. And when you fly and come back as an astronaut, no matter where you're at, anywhere in the world, you show up in those baby blue flight suits, and you get swamped with people that want to shake your hand, talk to you, touch you. One of the most interesting things about an astronaut, wherever they're doing, whether they're the pilot or co-pilot or a mission specialist, they all seem to come back to Earth with a heightened religious experience. Being out in space, seeing that their life is on a very thin string, seeing that they're wearing a spacesuit in a very fragile airplane, a rocket ship. You have an incredible religious experience. I've never experienced it, but I'm just saying over what people have said to me. I found an article recently where the first Russians who went to space were very proud to proclaim the doctrine that there was no God out there. They said to their mission control, "I didn't see a face of God out there." So it's, that was the political agenda. But everybody else that flew in space had religious experiences. They brought up Parsha, they brought up Chumash, they brought up Navi, and they prepared themselves for that because they knew they were going on quite an experience. Almost all of them, their personalities change as they approach flying. They become, I'll use the word, I'm not sure the right word, it's more humane, more humanistic, more worldly. more at peace. So they drop their combativeness, and they become more of a universalist as they approach the experience. And when they do come back, they become stronger in a religious sense. So that's an amazing after effect. And the great news is we have about 450 people walking around who can do that and relay that. Now, I work with Ilan Ramon in a couple of areas. Believe it or not, the first area that I try to help with is eating kosher food. Now, just be perfectly honest, Ilan Ramon was not particularly careful about kashrus when he was here on earth. But he knew, as a Jewish person, he, by the way, was one of 13 or 14 Jewish people to fly on the shuttle. He knew that as an Israeli, as a Jew, he was representing all of Yiddishkeit in going to space. He worked very closely with Rabbi Kanakov of Satellite Beach. And a lot of his questions of what should I do, how should I do it, were worked out between him and Rabbi Kanakov. Do I make Kiddush? Do I say Kriya Shema? What do I say when I see Eretz Yisrael for the first time? Ramon, want to bring up something that reflects on our history. He brought up a Sefer Torah that was given to him, that was used in the concentration camps. It was used, I think, for at least 1 or 2 bar mitzvahs in the concentration camps. This Sefer Torah was really small, and as you know, when you write a Sefer Torah, the height of the column has to be just so, and the width has to be so, and the spacing has to be so, but it was miniaturized, really, really small. And they brought in a bacher who was approaching his 13th birthday in a concentration camp. And they had, he got up every day, 5 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning, whatever, to practice his parsha, and he had his bar mitzvah. And that Sefer Torah was brought up, and Ilan was very proud of it. And he showed it.
The mitzvah boy was Yochem Yosef, the head of the space program for Israel.
Right. So he was very proud of that, and he made it a point of showing his fellow astronauts and the world that he was a Jewish person who really, really cared. This is what it's all about. This is truth. What this Sefer Torah, the ideas in here, the philosophy, the way of living, was real truth. And you could see the change, his change, and others changed the same as they approached launch. Now, just to rewind for yours truly, I knew that he was interested in having kosher food. Now, it's interesting, when you have food prepared at the Space Center, they essentially sterilize the kitchen, and they make the food that you, the astronaut, want. And you could fairly easily kosher the kitchen, but then what kashrus organization would supervise it? There was a lot of fighting. I'll call them the X and the Y and the Z organizations all wanted to have the claim that our organization supervised the kashrus of of the space station, whatever, and it was a problem that was going to have an unhappy ending. So the decision was made that Ilan would use kosher food, and it would be prepackaged, manufactured on Earth under different supervisions, so that no one company would be able to claim we were the sole provider of kosher food for space. So Ilan would bring home his freeze-dried blip blip, and he would taste it and give it to the family to taste it. And he would write on it, not so good, this is okay. But, that's the way it turned out. the day before the launch, you have these parties all over Satellite Beach, Cocoa Beach, and for the Israeli contingent, they picked to stay at the. Can I mention the hotel? Why not?
Yeah.
Hilton, the Hilton Inn on US 1, A1A in Cocoa Beach. And since the hotel knew that the Israelis were coming, they went out and bought all brand new catering.
Wow. That's
In
amazing.
anticipation that this is going to be a Jewish, Israeli, kosher event. So even and I don't know how they knew to go out and buy new kalim, but they did. I mean, I when I was talking to the kosher, when I was talking to the manager of the Hilton, and he told me about this. It was okay, and we'll go to the next step. So it was just unbelievable. We had hundreds of people come to the launch, came to the pre-launch party. Now, every time the shuttle takes off, maybe 1 in 3 takes off on time, because you have all these systems to check. And in this particular launch, 107, STS-107, Space Transportation System, STS-107, took off on time. It was a fantastic morning. Thousands of people lining the causeway, thousands of people going to the Saturn V building where you have the launch. I was out there with 2 doctors and their families, cheering on. There were people out in the observation stands davening, singing, saying Hallel. It was a real Kiddush Hashem all the way around. So in all of my contacts, I'm carrying around bags of souvenirs and pins and information sheets and Israeli flags and stuff like that, and give them out. Unfortunately, the mission was going to end on Shabbos, and as a Orthodox guy, I can't do that. If someone, going down to Florida and watching the landing by TV is, not rewarding. And I didn't want to get into the issue of, well, maybe someone could drive me there, but then, I wear my yarmulke all the time, and, Marasayan, there's all kinds of other things. So I said, okay, just have to sit this one out, and couldn't do it. So the people in my office, a handful of people in my office went down to Florida to greet the returning shuttle. And about 14 minutes before touchdown in Cape Canaveral, the shuttle met its final demise. Somewhere over Hawaii, when the shuttle re-enters the atmosphere, they start maneuvers, moving the wings about, banking left and right, forward, up and down, bleeding off as much speed as you can. The outside skin of a shuttle, parts of it can reach temperatures about 1650 degrees, really hot, and gases become ionized, and heat builds up. And we have pictures that were retrieved from the shuttle that showed these plasmas igniting. And unfortunately, the plasmas got in to the crack in that wing and melted the wing. And unfortunately, the shuttle then started to spin around and disintegrated. It was shocking. It was devastating. Words can't describe it, because millions of people watch it take off, and hundreds of thousands of people will see it come down, and somewhere over Oklahoma and Texas, the remains of the shuttle came to Earth. What else can you say? It's just a very, very sad, heartbreaking day. We shut down the program, and obviously didn't fly until we figured out what was going on. Hundreds of experts from academia, from industry came in to help do the flight review board work. And we didn't believe, until it was demonstrated, that foam could crack, put a hole, either crack or put a hole in a wing. Styrofoam. But if you look at it, but what they did is they took one of the wings of the shuttle that was in the Smithsonian Museum, took it to a test site, got a cannon, and put in all sizes and shapes of foam, and fired it to the wing. And the first number of times, nothing happened. And then on, I forget which try number, it blew a hole into that material. It's RCC, reinforced carbon on carbon material. And nobody had any idea that that would happen. NASA knows everything about a shuttle. Parts, transistors, motors, pipes, liquids, tar, glue, lubricants, you name it, and we know. We know the people who manufactured this transistor. I mean, it pretends it's a transistor, this integrated circuit. You pop it open, you see all these components in here. We knew the lot number, we knew the components, we knew the history of every part in the shuttle. We knew who made it, we knew when it was made, we knew the history. You know, people, whenever you have a big event going on or a significant event, we would call in, quote, the back room and get the experts out. And then when the shuttle comes back to Earth, we essentially disassemble the whole shooting match. We take out all the plumbing, all the electrical stuff, everything, all the hydraulics, all the wheels, everything. We disassemble it and we inspect everything with eyes and instruments. And we look for the nick. We look for the scratch. We look for the the broken part. We look for the joint that doesn't look exactly right. And there are millions of documented steps that you have to go through to get the shuttle to be recertified for flight. And it's a big deal. You sign off on. I hereby testify that, to the best of my ability, that this shuttle is now flight worthy, and I'm putting my name down on a piece of paper. And you have dozens and dozens, hundreds of different systems that have this pyramid effect of, I'm signing off, I'm taking responsibility for it, I am responsible for it. And we knew the history of everything, but we had no idea about this unknown. It's like an iceberg. The stuff on top is known knowns. Just below the waterline is known unknowns, and down below are the unknown unknowns, and that's where we were. Well, that's the short and long of it. Ilan Ramon was a very special person. He was an inspiration, a role model. He traveled back and forth between Israel and the United States. He trained for about 4.5 years. What's interesting is that he, as a pilot, and as I'm not sure if he was a type A personality, but when you get people who have responsibility behind them and they have a role, I think most of them are type A people. You know, I'm going to drive, I'm going to take over, and to have him in the role of a mission specialist, not the pilot, but this is an important science mission. This is a contribution that he wanted to make. This is something that was important, and he executed it flawlessly. Flawlessly. A lot of people go through a lot of stress, training and flying, and he did well. He did very, very well. He was a role model, and that's perhaps one of the best testaments that you can give to somebody. You know, were you a role model in your life? Did you do well? Were you a teacher? Yeah, were you a good student? And there you are. I did a fast roll for the past 40 minutes or so. Do you have any questions that I can help you?
Can I ask you? You mentioned that there were other Jewish American
Yeah.
astronauts.
Yeah, there was one Russian and about 12 or 13 others. Resnick was on the Challenger. She was lost,
Yeah.
and all the others are people of Jewish birth. To the best of my knowledge, none of them practiced the traditional flavor of Judaism that we know about.
So they weren't concerned about kashrut or
No.
Shabbat, or they never asked Rabbonim shalas or anything like that.
Now, as far as I know, the answer is correct. I used to have the list. I have it back in my room. I have a list of the astronauts, and Resnick and Ramelan were on the two shuttles that were lost. And there's one fellow is it in this book over here, The Coming Revolution?
Could be.
Yeah, there's one fellow in here, in this book, The Coming Revolution, that was, I'll hold up again here.
Okay, sure, you've got it.
He was quoted as an astronaut. No, it's not in this book. There's another book that Dr. Bank gave me that he was quoted. How did you feel about flying in space, and a lot of technical details, but didn't get into any of the Jewish Yiddishkeit type of things. Any other questions?
The International Space Station.
International Space Station is an ongoing program. It's a cooperative effort between a number of nations. I was involved in that from the very beginning, including the early Soyuz shuttle link-ups. Designing, you have a Soyuz and you have a shuttle, and having a birthing mechanism, and learning how to link up and build things internationally. You provide your side, you provide your side, and you have to agree to an interface. And then, the temperature, the atmosphere, the electrical stuff, and stuff like that. So we flew, I can't remember the number, half a dozen flights practicing that. And then the State Department gave NASA the go-ahead to have a joint mission with the Russians and the European Space Agency. So you have the big three: United States, the European Space Agency, and Russia. And what's great about that is they have a code of conduct. They have an agreed-upon protocol on how to cooperate in space. And for a period of time, an American runs the space station. And for a period of time, a Russian runs the space station. And for a period of time, one of the member nations of the European Space Station runs the space station. Now, what happens when you put a device on board the space station that encrypts data that goes between the Earth and the space station? So the typical approach would be to put something that is certified under NSA, National Security Administration type of encryption device. When you have a Russian running the space station and you have this very sensitive American component, what do? Do you have those devices or not? You have to ensure that the communications between the Earth and the space station and the Earth are not compromised by hackers and people want to do damage. So if you have a device that's on board that is, quote, secret or top secret, according to the Americans, then what do when you have a Russian running the space station? Just all kinds of interesting things. It's one of the best investments that the United States and Russia made was to do this International Space Station, because you don't have a fight when you have an American or a Russian on that common mission. You learn to play nice.
It takes them beyond the battlefield.
Exactly, and it's a very important platform for advancing science. Typical problem: you're in space, you're weightless, and you're floating around, and you're having a good time. Guess what? At the end of 1 month, you lose 1% of your calcium in your bones. 1%. So what's the problem? You're up there for 10 months. 10%. Guess what, guys? If you're on a trip to Mars and you don't have gravity, when you land on Mars, you will break every bone in your body. Unless you do exercise, take certain types of drugs, or have a space station or a vehicle rather that has artificial gravity. So the people who wrote science fiction a long time ago were thinking about that type of problem. They didn't know about the loss of calcium, but amazing problems. This afternoon we were just as we were coming here to this interview, I was speaking to 2 physicians, and I said, okay, suppose you're on a trip to Mars. What do you bring in terms of medicines? 1 of everything? 5 of everything? 3 of everything? Some? But the answer is, you probably want to manufacture what you really need in space. And that is one of the great things that you could learn how to do better here on Earth. You go out into to the Amazon or out to the bush world or in places, South Pole, North Pole, and you're going to be stuck there for a long time. You won't have the ability to give yourself the right kind of medicine. Here's another one. Suppose you're in a really harsh environment. For example, you're in outer space, or you are underneath the oceans, many miles down below, or you're in a place where you can't really get to air or oxygen. You want to have a system that will recycle your air and your water and clean the atmosphere so that you can live. Suppose you're in a submarine. For whatever reason, you're stuck underneath it, and you. So what was developed for the International Space Station was ECLIS. It's an environmentally, I forget what it all stands for, but it's an environmental system that cleans and recycles everything. Wow. So your perspiration, your fluids that you excrete are recycled, and you drink that. Wow. And you rebreathe the air, and you redo the atmosphere that you have in your vehicle. So this is, just a small byproduct of learning how to live in a hostile environment.
So can I ask, do you feel that space travel is going to be something of the future? It's the present already, but that it's going to be very popular? And
great question. The question is, what about the future? Is this a good investment? One of our administrators, Daniel Golden, said that when Columbus was going to the New World, he was looking for gems and gold and silver and stuff like that. And what did he bring back? Potatoes.
Yeah, potatoes.
He brought back potatoes.
Yeah.
And that's what people needed. Whenever you do research and development, you don't know what you're going to get. Now, talking about potatoes, the cost of NASA's program for world-class exploration is what Americans spend on an annual basis for potato chips. Hello? Do you think that the cost of a bag of potato chips, what you eat in potato chips a year, is that worth world-class exploration? And it's how many countries are doing world-class exploration, going to places that you haven't ever been to before, and pushing the envelope of science and knowing about the Earth and the solar system and ecology and water and weather, all that for the price of potato chips. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great investment. You can't find anything like that in the secular world that for that kind of return on investment.
The microchips are giving a megabyte.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Families going for vacation into space and
there's a number of companies that are competing to put up rides into space. For X number of dollars, you'll get onto a vehicle that will fly, not take off like a rocket, but fly like an airplane. And then when you're off the ground, that's the hardest part of flying, is getting off the ground. If you've gotten off the ground, then they'll turn on their rockets and fly into outer space, go around the world for a couple of orbits or whatever. You can take parts, shells, and devices and put up into space and build hotels in space if you wanted to. There are a lot of people out there. I can't predict the future, but if there's money to be made in space tourism, that's the place to be. And it's a great thing. Okay, any other questions?
Asia Torah actually has been donated a huge piece of the moon. Somebody bought a piece of it. And the truth of the matter is that being on planet Earth and reflecting on the accomplishments that space exploration has made for us. Take away the accomplishments of cell phones and emergency 911 connections and the response times that have become quite miraculous today, and realize what space really has contributed to civilization.
Yes. There's nothing like working on a cooperative program where lots of people get involved and bring a common interest to bear to do something. And this is where we should be going. In my work in research and development, like I just said with Columbus, you never know what's going to come out of it, and it's been for the best. It's for the best. Well, that kind of concludes yours truly, Stan Fishkind's impressions of working for Misar Bitachon, the Yom Kippur War, the shuttle program, and reflections on a real world-class hero.
Larger than life.
Yeah.
Stan, one on your chapter 1.
Yes.
Everybody knows that America helped Israel with the war and supplied weapons, and what about what Israel did for America? That's not so well acknowledged.
Well, yours truly was. I don't remember the room number, but I was in the room with generals right behind me, and harvesting that information between the Israelis and the Americans, and I know for a fact that those devices, those SAM-6 missile systems and stuff like that, were put on C-5 Galaxies and brought back to the States within days, of discovery, and there's always been a quiet
It's quiet. Yeah.
quiet exchange, you know, between the United States and Israel, and it's something you don't want to talk about openly. For example, when at the beginning of the Yom Kippur War, the Americans were flying satellites over the battlefield, and the Israelis were coordinating their airstrikes to bring out the SAM-6 missiles so that the Americans could gather as much radio intelligence as possible with the SAM-6 missiles. So the agreements were in place, the protocols were in place long before, and people talked to one another. You know, the generals talk to generals, and this person talks to this person. So there's always a very strong level of cooperation between the two countries. So it's great. Great.
Square.
My pleasure. Thank you again for the opportunity to talk, and I'm available. Okay.
Square.